Well, that was a very realistic approach. So I'm going to try to think how do we get to call ourselves urban designer and to apply for a job as such to start with. So I looked at definitions. What is education? And the Oxford Dictionary is always good for that. And basically, education. To educate, which is is to give intellectual, moral, and social instruction, especially as a formal and prolonged process. And I think that's the latter part is very important, something that we forget very often, is that education is something that takes time. And then Wikipedia, which is what most people consult today, gives us also a definition. And that's education. And there's something else, which is called training. And we very often confuse the two, and we use, and then I use the term myself, education and training. But training is quite different, and I think training is probably much more what you were thinking about, which is training for a specific task. Education is something that opens your mind and prepares you, probably gives you the generic skills that Louis was talking before, is to be able to resolve problems, to approach almost any task with some kind of methodology and thinking. Training is something slightly more limited, as the Pavlovian dog learned. So that's one kind of definition. The other thing is, what is an urban designer? And that's also not that easy to define, but the Dictionary of Urbanism gives us this as a definition. And basically, it tells you, it's something very wide, shaping the physical setting of life in villages, towns, and cities. That's some major task, basically. So, how do we you become an urban designer? Most of us start with another profession that leads to professional qualification. We become planners, architects, landscape architects, engineers, etc. And then, at some point, what you want to do in your life when you grow up, Jimmy, I want to be an urban designer. So you then either go to a postgraduate course, or you learn it on the job, or you go through CPD. And that's basically what's on offer. The postgraduate education is mostly a master's in urban design, and maybe that's what you go through for a year or two. But how do you decide? How do you decide what you're going to do? You've done your first degree, and then what? So first of all, are you a planner? You will need certain things. Are you an architect? You will need very different things. Are you a landscape architect? It's another set of skills. And then also, what kind of urban designer do you want to be? Do you want to actually design? Or do you want to evaluate and decide on other people's designs? And in fact, both of them are called urban designers these days. So there is nobody who's going to tell you this is the path to become an urban designer. You have to look into yourself and look at what is available, and it's not going to be something that you do in 24 hours. All of which is slightly unfortunate, and it comes back to where urban design came from and where these specialism came from. When planning was created, it was basically an offspring of architecture and engineering, both in Britain and in the rest of Europe. There wasn't such a thing until the beginning of the 20th century as a town planning profession. And in a lot of European countries, when you become an architect, you automatically become an urbanist as well, and it's considered equivalent to what we in Britain consider to be planning, to be urban design. Or planning, actually. So it was quite easy to go from one profession to the other. But in the 60s, for a whole series of reasons that I'm not going to go into it, the two professions, mainly architecture and planning, went different directions. And what happens now is exactly what Louise mentioned, is that we basically, the two professions don't talk to each other and have very low opinions of each other, not just the planners and architects, but also the engineers. So we think that the other is rubbish, basically. Oops, sorry. Peter Hall looked into that in Cities of Tomorrow, and there's a whole section where he goes into quite a lot of detail about the changes in the planning profession, and not only in the type of work that planners did, but also in the development of something called planning theory, which I used to teach 25 years ago. And a lot of people who then graduated said, planning theory is a complete waste of time. We needed to know how to deal with development control. And so the two things, again, split apart, what was the sort of body of theory about planning and what actually most planners were doing on a daily basis. Again, going back to what a planner, an urban designer does, Matthew Carmona, who we were hoping to be here tonight but couldn't come, has described the kind of thing that urban designers do in practice. And if you look at employers, you will find that in a private practice, a consultancy will employ mostly a designer, somebody who holds a pen, whilst the local authorities will either employ somebody who writes policies about design or gets the community involved with design. Now, you could say that they should all have the same skills, that you can't write design policies and talk about guidance or development control if you're not a designer yourself. But that's unfortunately not how it happens. And one of the problems is that design is a complicated thing to teach and a complicated thing to learn. One of my colleagues was commenting the other day that people think that design is creativity, therefore you have to have inspiration. You're creating things from nothing. And in fact, creativity is not quite that. Creativity is to take things that have already been done, 2 or 3 things that have been done, and combining it in a new form, in a different form. So you need to have a lot of experience. You have to see, to have observed, to have understood what other people have done before you can design something which is new, which is not actually completely new. It's a reinterpretation of what other people have done before. So it's a thing of going back and forth about what yourself are being done, and that's something that takes a lot of time. What we have had in the last few years, and it's very good, is that through CABE and other organizations we have had a whole lot of advice. And local authorities who produce design guides and so on and so forth. But all that is not going to tell us how to design. A lot of them, unfortunately, have lists where you can tick, and you think, oh, tick, 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 I've done my job. But that's not what it is. They are very useful, but they're not a replacement for the job of the urban designer. They're an accompanying or a complement to it. And also, by now you need a course just on being able to understand all these, or to have the time to read all these. The first sentence of this is a very well-known one that Alexander Pope have said, but I was glad to see to find the whole quote. And this was pointed out to me by one of our colleagues who used to run a local authority, and when I talked to him about giving some training to his planning staff in urban design, he said no, because if I give them a little bit of training, that, that'd be a disaster. Either we have to really give them a lot of it, or it's better not to have them know anything. Slightly depressing, but the danger is that a lot of people come here one evening a month and say, oh, I'm an urban designer because I've been to one lecture on urban design, or I go to a CPD thing called urban design organised by the RTPI, pay £500 for it, and I listen to somebody for the whole day, therefore I'm an urban designer. And that's very dangerous. Okay? That's one thing that we should avoid, but we have no way of controlling. Another issue that has already been mentioned is that if we are urban designers, we have to work with other people. And unfortunately, a lot of the CPD or courses organized by the professional bodies are for people in that professional capacity. The architects do CPD on urban design maybe for architects. And it's basically addressing one particular aspect. The planners do it for planners. What we need is the ones that overlap the various professions. So what is on offer? I've already sort of more or less mentioned it. If you're studying architecture, you might have in your last year a thing called urbanism, which is generally a big architecture. If you're a planner and you're lucky, you have one module that is called something like urbanism or urban design, or in our course, I think at Westminster, it's called management and places or something like that. And it's 3 hours a week for 6 months. Or probably the best way of becoming an urban designer is to take an MA in urban design, but there's not that many people who can do it. And then there's the CPD that I've mentioned. The various forms of CPD would go from a few lectures during one day or a few evenings over a year or something like that. I must say that what I see advertised as CPD in urban design, I generally find totally appalling and expensive. So, what's CPD? What other alternatives there are? And they are available. There are workshops. They can be in-house, or they can be generic, if you want, offered by organizations. There are study visits. There are intense residential courses like the Cape Summer School. And there's now distance learning. Okay, so that's basically the workshops. I've run a large number of workshops, and I can tell you they work much, much better. They're always based on people doing something and therefore remembering much more than if they're just listening to it. Study tours, the Urban Design Group has done study tours, but I just will mention that they are employers who organize study tours. The local authorities, unfortunately, don't very much because they think that their constituents will consider that it's a freebie for the councillors or the officers. But I know of one case of an employer that takes all his staff, some of his clients, and some of his even competitors and some of his consultants. He takes them once a year for a 2 or 3 day study tour, and they work hard. They work from 8:30 in the morning to 8:30 in the evening. I think you know what I'm talking about. And I've asked him, he pays for everything. He pays for the hotel, for the flights, for everything. And I've asked him, how can you afford that? He said, it pays twice over. I get so much out of it. My staff get so much better. My consultants get so much more out of it. So, but there's local visits by councillors to see what works and doesn't work, what they have approved 5 years earlier in terms of planning applications. What does it look 5 years later? So I was in a meeting the other day. I was appalled to hear that councillors said, but in my council, we will visit schemes in our local authority, but we won't go to others because there's nothing to do with us. So they'll be so parochial that we'll only look at the local ones. So anyway, summer schools don't have to always be in the summer, but obviously they cost money, but by their intensity and by the fact that people work on a project or work together for 3, 4 a week, whatever it is, they're very effective. And let me say also that the in-house workshops are extremely effective and cost-effective as well, because you don't have one person from your staff that goes to a course. You have everybody together. We already seen this diagram. I think that what is important is this idea that we have to have an integrated design team, and that we therefore have to work together with other people. I've made that comment before, but urban design is a collaborative and interdisciplinary activity, and therefore you have to have people from different backgrounds, and there's nothing better than bringing together people from the same organization into a room and finding suddenly that they've never talked to each other, even though they work for the same local authority or the same consultant, but oh no, we never met, oh no, we don't talk to each other. And they suddenly realize that they are dealing with the same issues, the same projects, and they haven't talked to each other. And if you don't do anything else, you're getting them towards doing urban design. Now, coming to what John was saying before, and this is almost the end, I thought, okay, so I'm talking about all these things that people should go on courses and so on and so forth, and now everybody is in a recession and they're cutting staff and so on and so forth, and they're thinking that, it's the end and so on. And I thought, well, this is the worst thing that we could do, is to stop training people, giving them better skills. And we have had all these years where people said, we haven't got the time to do, to reflect. We haven't got the time to prepare master plans because the planning applications are arriving all the time. We haven't got the time to reflect on what urban design really is. Well, now you have the time. So, the local authorities, the employers, should prepare for the next boom by improving the skills of their staff. And I was lucky that the guy that is has written the interview that we have in the next issue of the magazine. One of the things that he says is that he worked in Birmingham in the early 90s, and it was thanks to the recession that Birmingham was able to do what they did later on. They took advantage of the recession, and the results of the renewal of Birmingham was what came out of it. Right. How do you decide what you're going to do if you want to become an urban designer? Well, that's a big issue, one that I flagged in the magazine. There is no way of finding out what is good and what is bad. There's plenty out there. How do you decide which is the best for you? Unfortunately, there isn't much information out there. You can read the brochure, you can look at who the speakers are, but that's about it. And I'm afraid I haven't got an answer to that. I think the Urban Design Group could start thinking about that. Thank you very much. We put